Would
Okay.
you would you like us to be with camera? Would that make your life better?
If you know, I'm pretty flexible because I get it, but it's up to you. I don't enforce that on anyone. So
Okay.
it's up to you if you feel comfortable doing that, that's fine. Um,
It,
I'm pretty laid back about it. So it's
okay.
okay. All right. Well, welcome to Look Forwards in a Classroom with English Learners. While you're waiting or have been waiting, just know that we are recording. Please keep yourself muted unless it's an opportunity for you to unmute and speak. And I do say, please, if possible, keep your camera on. But I completely understand if that's not, if you're not comfortable with that, or um, it just doesn't make you feel comfortable. That's completely fine. We're going to use the chat box for communication. We will collaborate in breakout rooms because we do only have a few people in today's session. We likely may not go into breakout rooms. We'll probably just stay together. We will participate in polls, and then there will be QR codes to take you to outside documents that you'll want to be able to refer to. You can either use the link that I put in the chat box that can take you to that in another in another tab in on your computer or another browser, or you can use your phone, which is what I typically like to do when I'm in a session attending one. Is that way I can just look on my phone. So it's up to you, but we will visit some other places to look at some resources. And then following today's session, I will email you the PDF version of today's presentation, as well as any other resources that we've talked about. Okay. Also, if you are on Twitter, feel free to share your learning today, and you can tag me. I also run the Bilingual ESL Twitter handle. And then if you want to tag ESC Region 11 to share your learning. Okay. So Look Forwards in a Classroom with English Learners, and this session is actually for administrators. I do do a session occasionally for teachers. The reason that I feel so strongly about sharing this information is once I was an ESL specialist on a campus, and often my administrator, no fault of his or hers, but they really didn't know what I did. And so often, I would get handed this during PDOS, excuse me, and I can't remember what it was before that, but I would get handed this evaluation, and really, it didn't always mean a whole lot because they didn't really know what I did and how, that looked with English learners. Today, really, though, the focus will not be in a small group setting. However, the things I'm going to share would be applicable to that, but really looking at our classroom teachers. Classroom teachers believe whether they realize it or not, if they are ESL certified, they are actually providing those ESL services in the classroom. And so really looking at when you go in and you are supporting classroom teachers, whether you're doing that as an appraiser or central office staff coming in and looking at what's going on in the classroom and how to better support the ESL or bilingual programs, or maybe you're an instructional support person on campus. So really just this could be applicable to not just administrators, but those supporting teachers in a classroom. I am starting my 23rd year in education, and all of those years have been serving English learners. I started off as a classroom teacher, self-contained, moved into ESL specialist position, did that for many years, and eventually went into central administration, where I had the unique situation where I, myself and another director, we actually supervised the ESL specialists across the district. So they reported to us. I did their PDOS and eventually their T-tests. And it was just, we were almost like a satellite campus. We were the hub and our teachers were spread out throughout the district. I come from a pretty large district prior to coming to the service center. And I'm just extremely passionate about the work and helping educate others and give them that knowledge to better support our English learners. You'll see over here a fact sheet. TEA just recently released this fact sheet along with another one. And you can see that Texas actually serves just under 1 in 5 of the nation's ELs. Region 11, believe it or not, we are number 4 in the state of Texas for serving English learners in a bilingual or ESL program. So that's pretty large. If you think about the state of Texas, you can see the image of Texas over to the side and the different service centers there throughout. There are 20, and Region 11 is actually number 4. Our languages in Texas, we have over 120 plus languages spoken. 90% is Spanish, and then 7.2 are other languages. Here in Region 11, our top 2 languages are obviously Spanish, but then the other is Vietnamese. And we do have districts and our charter schools in our region that have a Vietnamese bilingual program. So we're very diverse. And, if you don't have an English learner currently, it may only be a matter of time that you do. And so how do we better prepare our staff and ourselves to support this population of students? So we've had an opportunity to kind of share pre-session of who we are, but if you will, if you would like to just real quickly unmute yourselves, and then Robin, I'll let you go ahead and start. Or excuse me, Sandra, why don't you go ahead and start, since you didn't get an opportunity before. Just share your name, your district charter, what is your role and position, and what do you want to gain from today? And so Sandra, if you'll go first, and then Robin will have you go.
Hi, my name is Sandra Denning. I am currently moving from the CFO position and into a full-time curriculum as the assistant superintendent. So my goal today is to come out and have a working conversation, to be able to have a working conversation with classroom teachers in helping our ELL students. Our ELLs and our SPED are 2 target populations this last year and moving forward to this year. And I want to be able to give a teacher some actual hands-on ideas on how to help those kiddos in the classroom.
Awesome, Sandra. And Sandra, tell us where you're coming from.
I'm sorry, I could have done that. Keene ISD.
Oh, okay. Yes. So I work with David Diz a lot.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Great.
Welcome, Sandra. We're happy to have you.
Thanks.
And Robin, will you share real quickly, just, you kind of shared with me, but if you'll share with our audience and what you'd like to gain from today.
I am currently not working, and I'm just here to kind of get a refresher for when I do go back to the classroom, the ways that I can help the students.
All right, perfect, Robin. Well, thank you. We're glad you're here. All right, so let's go ahead and get into our material today. Real quickly, we're going to start off with a poll. So when you think about this topic, how you support teachers when you go into the classroom and coach them into understanding is at. So we're going to do a real quick poll, and the poll is going to be, do you feel like you are at the beginner stage? Are you intermediate, advanced, or advanced high? And you'll notice these are like our TELPAS levels, but where do you feel like you're at this point in time, your level of understanding as it relates to supporting teachers in a classroom with English learners? So real quickly, if you will vote. Okay, so both of you voted. I have 2 screens going today, so I'm not sure if you can see the results because I have one screen that's showing it, but it looks like one of you are at intermediate and one of you are at advanced. But something I like to always share, you guys are not at beginner level, but we all start off as a beginner at something at some point, and the goal is to move up a level, right? And to increase our understanding, like T-tests, right? We moved away from PDOS to T-tests, where it's about that progression and refining and making improvements. So today, I hope that you leave with a little more understanding than what you're coming with today, at least knowing where you can go for support. So who is an English learner? Chapter 89 defines an EL as a person who is in the process of acquiring English and has another language as the first native language. The terms English language learner and limited English proficient are used interchangeably. ELL is no longer the term that is used. You'll hear from state to state people are still, they may still use ELL and some use ELD. There's all types of different acronyms, but the state of Texas has moved away from that and just now it's English learner. But you will hear that word LEP, LEP, EL, all of those things being used interchangeably. I like to explain it like this. LEP, that's that indicator in PEIMS. Okay, so that's your you know, the system that has all of your data in there that's coding your students so you get your funding and all of that. That LEP code is an indicator. The EL is the student. So I always try to kind of help people understand that, yes, they're a LEP, they're an EL, but really when we talk about LEP, that's that indicator in PEIMS, and that indicator can be turned off and on. So it's turned on when they're identified, it's turned off when they reclassify as English proficient. And then English learner, that is your student, okay? All right, real quickly, before we move on to what we should see and hear in the classroom with English learners, I would like for you guys to kind of share what you feel like you should see and hear in a classroom with ELs. And I want you to think about this. I want you to think about what would you see and hear in the classroom. So if you walked into a classroom that had English learners, what would you see and hear going on in the classroom? So think about more of the environment, the climate and the atmosphere. Also, what would you see and hear the teacher doing? And then think about the student. What would you see and hear from the student, from the English learners, or maybe even other students in that classroom? So really in thinking about, you know, the whole picture, the environment of the classroom, but also the interactions and what's going on between the teacher and the students. So what we're going to do is I'm going to let you unmute yourselves and share what you think that you would see and hear in a classroom with English learners, or what you should see or hear. Oh, we have another participant coming in. You know what I'm going to do, guys? I have another participant coming in. Welcome, Charlie.
Good. Hey, how are you?
I'm good. Okay, so we're going to shift gears since we have another person with us. But real quickly, Charlie, if you will real quickly just introduce yourself to our group today.
Sorry, I was on the call with an instructional coach and got distracted.
It's okay.
I am the curriculum coordinator at Lake Dallas ISD, so also ESL coordinator.
Okay, perfect. All right. Where we're moving now is what should we see and hear in a classroom with English learners? So thinking about the classroom, when you walk in, what will you see and hear? The teacher, what will we see from him or her? And then the students. So since we do have 3 people in now, we have a low attendance today. What I would like to do is I am going to send you to a breakout room because I think it'll be more comfortable. You can just go in, you guys can just real quickly share from those 3 points of view what you should see and hear, and then we'll come back together, okay? So real quickly, I'm going to go back. Okay. I have to stop share to send you to the breakout rooms. And I think it'll just make it more comfortable than me putting you on the spot. All right, so I'm sending you to your breakout room and we're gonna do, let's do 5 minutes. Let's see if that's long enough. And so once you get in, just real quickly, because Sandra and Robin, you didn't get a moment just to say who you are, because Charlie wasn't in here yet. So just real quickly, hi, I'm Melanie from Region 11. Introduce yourselves, and then just go down and think about what should you see and hear from the classroom, the teacher and the students, and then I'll peek in and make sure you guys are doing okay. I heard lots of great things. I was actually looking up to see if we had an upcoming workshop on word walls, because Sandra, you and Charlie were talking about that. I may have to do a little more digging because my new colleague that was added to my team this year. I was a party of one and finally now have someone with me, but I know that he either has already done the word wall session or has one coming up. So if I will look and see, and that might be something that you guys might be interested in, to see how he talks about that, because I don't know if the target audience is just English learner teachers in general or bilingual or ESL, but either way, I will get back and let you guys know that.
And it was the girl on your team that did it for us.
Oh, Elena.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, she's my unofficial team member. Robin says it's coming up. Yeah, she's in the literacy team, but she does do work with us. Yes, Elena. So one of them, I can't remember who, but Robin says one is coming up. It might be something that you guys might be interested in. Word walls, I know we're kind of going off topic, but very powerful. Even when I taught middle school, we had a word wall. So it's what I noticed most whenever I would do walkthroughs is that there were so many missed opportunities. I would walk through a classroom and I would hear a student ask a teacher how to spell a word, and nothing would happen with it. And the same words would be on the word wall each time I would walk through, and where they don't understand it's a living document. Like on the spot, you stop, or however you want to address it, but it needs to, the students need to understand that this is a living, breathing document that we use constantly. And I know there are definitely the challenges with, wall space, virtual learning. We have those challenges, but I know so many have overcome those challenges and have come up with lots of creative ways. So I love to hear that you guys were, talking about that. And I loved hearing the pieces about, working on practicing the language. You should hear the students talking, not just the teacher. Often I say this, the ones doing the talking are the ones doing the learning. So if it's your teacher if the teacher's doing all the talking, your students are not doing a whole lot of learning. The ones doing the talking are the ones doing the learning. So it's very, very important that our students are engaged in using that language, especially our English learners. But Sandra, I liked hearing you say that your expectation is that all classrooms are run or managed like they're English learners in there. And yes, we want all of our classrooms to do all those great best practices that we want our ESL teachers to do, or when they have English learners. And the thing is it is best practices. And you've probably heard that over the years. ESL strategies are best practices, and they are, but they're absolutely necessary for an English learner. So it's, yes, all kids, we want them to engage, and we want those teachers to scaffold and do all those things for any kid, but they're absolutely critical for that English learner. It's absolutely necessary that happens. All right. Thanks, guys, for, bearing through the awkwardness of only a few. Okay. All right. So now that you've had the opportunity just to share what you think you should see and hear in a classroom with ELs, now let's take a look at some ideas. Now, please know that this is not an exhaustive list. And where this all came about was when I was still in district, my, assistant superintendents and those were coming to us and saying, we need to have an idea of what it should look like. So I created this kind of checklist in a sense for our campus principals and APs that they could use to kind of gauge whether or not that classroom had the elements that were needed to make a successful classroom with English learners. So please know what I'm going to share is not an exhaustive list. But let's take a look at the classroom first. So when we take a look at the classroom, it should be welcoming and supportive. And what does that even look like? So cultivates acceptance of diversity by acknowledging students' backgrounds. So we don't want to just negate that, our student is coming from a completely different background. We want to honor that. And that's an opportunity for learning and to highlight that student and where they're coming from. Also, an effort is made to correctly pronounce students' names. I cannot tell you over the years how many times I have interacted with teachers who have asked the student to use a nickname or called them something different because they couldn't pronounce their name. And believe me, I understand as a long-time ESL teacher that we do get names that are hard to pronounce, but I would just ask them, please say it again, please say it again, so that I could, do my best to pronounce it. But our names are our identities. And I don't know about you, but I don't like it when people call me something different. And for example, my name is Melanie, and my husband calls me Mel. Well, I've had people call me Mel that I don't even really know. Like, I don't know you well, and I know it's still part of my name, but it bothers me because you don't really know me well enough to call me that. But really, it's important that our names are honored. So please, encouraging to make that effort. Also, modeling empathy by showing compassion towards the students that are struggling to acclimate. So the teacher modeling, it's okay, even if they don't speak the language, just smiling. Smiling is free. It doesn't cost anything, and just bringing comfort to that student that is struggling to acclimate. Many of our students, especially when they come in secondary, they may not have wanted to come. They've left friends, maybe girlfriends or boyfriends, or even have left family. And I've dealt with students when I was at middle school and high school that were angry about being here. And so just really helping them acclimate. Also, we would see that students are taking risks to speak and participate. They feel comfortable enough that they're not going to be laughed at, or the teacher is not going to ridicule them, that they really feel comfortable enough that they are going to speak and participate. Students are also included in a non-threatening way. They're not as outcast in the classroom. I've done walkthroughs before, particularly at secondary, where there was a student sitting off in the corner and not being included in the group. And this was an ESL classroom because the student didn't have the language. And so just making sure that we include them in non-threatening ways, but not forcing students to speak or participate when they're not ready. Also, student effort is valued by the teacher and peers. So when our English learner is putting forth effort, in particular when they're a newcomer, that teacher, as well as the peers, are valuing that, oh, great, good job, you're doing great. And often I like to kind of use the comparison to young children. When you have a young child, and in the beginning they can hear you, but they can't respond to you. And then eventually they can. But think about how, if you do have children or family members that are young children, that when they first start talking, how we, oh, good job, we are their use of the language. And then again, students are not forced to participate. We don't want to force the students to participate when they're a newcomer. Now, there are times when they've been here for a while or years, and that's something completely different. But when you have a newcomer, just remember that it is not, we want to be mindful, and we don't want to force them to participate. Some students do go through a silent period, and where they're just taking in the information, and they're not speaking. So linguistic support is accessible. What does that look like? What does that even mean? So in action, we would see that items in the classroom are labeled. This is not just for elementary. So even all the way through pre-K 12, if you have read any of Seidlitz's work on language-rich classrooms, or you've attended one of my language-rich classroom sessions, labeling your classroom is extremely helpful. It builds vocabulary, it helps with reading, spelling, all of it. Also, I would say be mindful. I'll get a lot of questions about, well, should I translate it into Spanish? Should we have it in English and in Spanish, or whatever other language? What I would tell you is, if the other students, the ELs in your room, in that classroom, are all Spanish speakers, then and they all, learn to read in Spanish and write in Spanish, then that would be helpful to them. But if you have a lot of Spanish speakers and then you have one that speaks Korean, you need to be cognizant and be mindful that you have to represent all languages. So we wouldn't just have Spanish, we would need to have Korean as well. And that could be a challenge. So I would encourage you, if you are going to do multiple languages, that it needs to represent all languages that are sitting in that classroom. Progressive word walls, displaying academic language. And what I mean by progressive is it's constantly growing. We shouldn't see the same few words on the word wall when we come back through. It should be a constant, use, and you should see the teacher on the spot sharing, how we're going to use the word wall, and you should see students looking at the word wall. And it may be that it's electronic. It may be that it's on note cards on rings. There are lots of different approaches. Content visuals and anchor charts. Extremely helpful to have visuals all over the room, regardless if I'm a language learner or not. Our brains are very much wired for visuals. And I don't know about you, but whenever I am searching through Facebook or Instagram, I'm more likely to click on something with a pretty image or something that kind of draws me in. So our brains are automatically wired to really react to that. Anchor charts. I would encourage you to encourage your teachers that anchor charts, it shouldn't be that I made this beautiful anchor chart and I'm going to stick it on the wall, because then it just becomes wallpaper, just like the word walls. It becomes wallpaper. It should be that we are going to create an anchor chart together. Maybe I'm doing it and I'm leading a discussion. We're introducing new content and I'm going to create some type of visual in our anchor chart, and then we're going to put it up. Or you have students create them, but just making one and putting it up is not going to be as meaningful. Sentence stems and paragraph frames are available. So we would see that there are some general sentence stems that are displayed to be used during conversation or writing, as well as paragraph frames being available. It's important to model and to give that exemplar. I like to share that this example. How many of you, when you may have been applying for a new job, may have asked someone, hey, can I see your resume? Let me know in the chat box. Was that any of you? Have any of you ever asked, whether it's, I would like to see your resume, or maybe it's, I've got to send an important email. And have you ever sent an email like that? Can I see what you said? Okay. So whenever I was in my position in district, when I first started, it was very scary for me to send emails to like the superintendent or assistant superintendent or even principals. It made me nervous when I had to ask for teachers to be off campus or whatever it may be. And so I would ask, the director, hey, can I see emails that you've sent in the past? And it was so helpful to me. So when I left that role, the person that took my job, I saved all those emails and said, here you go, here's a format. Because here's the thing, eventually we can look at people's formatting and we can see what was said. And then maybe in the beginning, we're tweaking it and using it, but then eventually we make it our own. And no longer do we need those emails or those resumes from others. We can do it independently by ourselves. So it's no different about these sentence stems, and you think about these paragraph frames. So bilingual ESL picture dictionaries. In the classroom, again, I understand if you don't have the funding or the resources to do that, but it's helpful if you can have bilingual dictionaries or an ESL dictionary that is very simplistic, and or picture dictionaries. And if you are wondering, well, which ones are appropriate, which ones can be used for testing, that's a whole nother conversation, but I'm happy to share with you some of the dictionaries that I purchased when I was still in district for my bilingual and ESL teachers. Something else to also note is just because we get a new student in and their home language survey says a particular language, that doesn't mean that student can read or write their native language. Oh, hold on. Can you guys still see me? Oh gosh. Okay. All right, sorry about that glitch. Okay, let me go back. Okay, so real quickly, again, like I was saying, bilingual dictionaries, you could get a student who doesn't read or write in that language. And that has happened to me where I've had, campuses calling and saying, hey, we need a bilingual dictionary for this language. And come to find out the student cannot read or write in that language. I've even had students that come from a country where they, that language, there is no written language. It is literally just, oral communication. There's no dictionary that could even be found. So just something to think about. So now when we think about the teacher, what should we see and hear from that teacher? And I want you to also really be thinking about, this is any classroom. So if you go into a math or science classroom, that teacher may or may not be ESL certified because the minimum requirement is the ELA teacher, okay? So even though we're going into math, science, social studies, or any elective, we still want these things to be happening in the classroom. So what I'm sharing, these elements, we want to spread the wealth. We want everyone to know that even though you're not ESL certified, you may or may not have some ESL kids in your classroom this class period or this year, but these are things that we want to see happening. So implementing best practices. I talked about earlier how these are best practices, but they're absolutely necessary for our English learners. So what does that look like? Giving clear and explicit instructions. That is so, so important. It's important for all of our students, but if you're an English learner, it's especially important. Checking for understanding and providing feedback. So making sure, did you get it? And also providing feedback to that student. Encourages classroom discussions. So you'll see the teacher encouraging discussions on the topic using the academic language. Incorporating graphic organizers. If you are familiar with thinking maps, that is another great tool. It's something that in my prior district we used. I'm actually a thinking maps trainer and cannot say enough good things about it because our brain automatically sorts information, and using graphic organizers is just only natural. Thinking maps, if you're not familiar with them, I would encourage you to look it up and just take a look and see what's there. But also we have our other traditional organization maps that we've used, throughout the years. Modeling that gradual release. This is so important. The I do, the we do, the you do. And again, you notice all these things I've shared so far. This is something that we want to see in every classroom. But again, going back to that thought of it's absolutely necessary for the English learner. And providing multiple opportunities to speak in varied context. We can't just expect students to speak in a social aspect. We have to vary. It has to be academic. Let's do debate. Think about all the different ways that we need to allow those students to have those opportunities to speak. So often I would have this conversation with a classroom teacher. Well, I don't know why they're in ESL. They speak just fine. And I would get that over and over. And what they weren't understanding is, yes, just having a social conversation, they're doing great. But when it comes down to academic, and we wouldn't come down until we got to star time, and the student was not successful, and we wondered why. Well, we didn't practice. We aren't practicing using that academic language. And I think you probably would all agree it's not just the English learner. Our students that do struggle on academic assessments, it's typically the vocabulary that hangs them up. Also providing text structures and explicit grammar instruction. There's lots of controversy about teaching grammar. Some say, oh, well, they just need to learn it in context and they'll naturally learn it. I don't know about you if you've ever tried to learn another language, but I needed explicit instruction to know when to use this, why do we use this. And that's extremely important for English learners to have explicit grammar instruction and to give them those text structures. What does it mean to write an expository? What does it look like for a narrative? All those different structures are important. If you're not familiar with Gretchen Burnaby is the guru, in my opinion, of text structures and explicit grammar instruction. And in my follow-up email, I will send you guys a link to her blog and some of her resources, some which are free. You can just access them online, but extremely important to be very explicit about instructing grammar. Also, daily writing opportunities. This does not mean that we have to journal every day, although that's great. It doesn't mean we have to write a 5-paragraph essay. This just means is there opportunity to write? It could be on a sticky note, it could be on a dry erase board, but just every day and in every content, not just an ELA. That's been that ongoing issue of why students aren't making progress across the board is we're relying on the ELA teacher when we should be reading and writing and speaking in math, science, social studies, and our elective classes. And then our language objectives, the ELPS, the English Language Proficiency Standards, are addressed alongside the TEKS. So, you know, the ELPs are the standards for language, and the TEKS are our content objectives. Okay, so we have language objectives and content objectives. All right, so linguistically accommodates. What does that mean? What does that look like? Allowing that extra processing time. So when a teacher asks a question or is having a conversation, that they allow that extra time for the student to process, because most often that student is translating in their head and trying to put together what they're going to say in English. Uses gestures and other linguistic support to communicate language and content. So when you have a newcomer, it's a lot of, you know, using hand motions. If you're familiar with TPR, total physical response, that is one EL strategy where it's a lot of gestures using your hands, but whatever means you need to be able to communicate. And I think about this when I travel. So if you've ever traveled abroad, and you and I don't mean, you know, like a Spanish speaking country, because many of us took Spanish, right, and probably in school. But for example, me and my husband 2 summers ago went to Paris, and I do speak Spanish, and I thought, oh, surely I can kind of, you know, use some of that to speak the French. No. And it was awful because they were not nice about it. And I had to figure out ways, my husband and I, besides using our phones, had to figure out ways to communicate. And that's really still pretty easy because most people speak English, right? But I want you to think about, you know, should you go to an Arabic speaking country or someplace where it's not, you're nowhere familiar, how are you going to communicate? And now I want you to take that back to the classroom. What are all the different ways? I can draw pictures, I can point, I can use gestures. So when you do get a teacher that's struggling with that newcomer, I always like to put it in perspective of, well, what would you do if you had to go abroad? How would you communicate? And typically those same strategies are going to help your students. So models and provides practice and pronunciation of academic terms. Don't let students go saying the word wrong. We want to correct them, and not in a bad way. I go back to the example of your young children. So when, you know, my 3 kids were learning to speak, and they might say the word wrong, I would say, "Oh, so you mean banana," whatever it was, and I would say it correctly. So I wouldn't say, "Well, that's wrong. That's not the way we say banana." I mean, I would just repeat it. "Oh, so you mean a banana?" And they say, shake their head. I say, "Okay, say banana." And again, depending on the age of the student, there's going to be the right way to kind of go about it. But you definitely want to make sure that you are practicing pronunciation, because again, if you've ever spoken another language, I've said words wrong in Spanish. One time I used the wrong word even. I used the word for pregnant as opposed to another one. And they were like, "You're pregnant?" I'm like, "No, I'm not pregnant. I'd used the wrong word." And so just making sure that we do correct, but in an appropriate way. Also, when you think about curriculum and you think about your content, it's important that we focus on the big ideas and the key points. When you have a newcomer or even all the way beginner, intermediate, maybe even some advanced, really taking a look at the unit of study. What are we studying? What are the big focus ideas? What are those essential questions? And really focusing on those pieces. Because when you have a newcomer, they're not going to be able to cover everything that the class is doing. They're not going to be able to potentially cover all the TEKS. Is the teacher still teaching all of them? Yes, we are. But we have to really take a look at what we're focusing on for that kid. And that may be some small group time or something where we're going to go back and review or pre-teach. But we cannot expect to, I like to use the water hose analogy. We can't water hose them with information and expect that they're going to get it. Because I don't know about you, but whenever I'm water hosed with information, I only get a little bit. Some goes in and the other goes out the other ear. So we have to be mindful. Our brains naturally, this is science, it only takes in so much information. And so chunking the information is extremely important in really minimizing and focusing on those big ideas when you're talking about newcomers. Also providing scaffolded sentence stems. And these sentence stems are good for speaking and writing. So this is not just about, I've got sentence stems up on my wall and we're only using them for speaking. This is also for writing. This helps with writing. And so encourage your teachers when they are doing writing assignments, depending on the level of the student, that they may give more. Maybe it's more of a paragraph frame or just leveled sentence stems. An explicit instruction of vocabulary. Earlier, we talked about grammar. It's the same with vocabulary. We have to be explicit. We can't just assume that the kid is going to get it. For example, a lot of teachers use Brain Pop. I love Brain Pop. It's something that I used whenever I was in the classroom as well. I think it's great to be able to give students that bite size, piece of information to introduce concepts or to even review. But something I always like to do is I would pause the video when it got to a vocabulary word and we would talk about, oh, what does that word mean? And, our ELs, many of them are not going to know, but even our own native English speakers may not know the word. And so being very explicit and stopping and pausing and saying, do you know what that word means? And then moving on. Providing clarification when introducing new or unfamiliar topics. So when thinking about topics that maybe students have not encountered, if they're a newcomer, it's likely they have not had that before. Also, we have to be very mindful that with our English learners, let's say they're in 5th or 6th grade, teachers often think, well, you should have had that in 3rd, or you should have had that in 2nd grade. If they were here, they were still learning language at that point, most likely, not always, but most likely. So at that point in time, what they're doing is they're doing double duty, right? They're learning the English language and they're learning content. And so it's likely that maybe they didn't get that concept that is just being reviewed once they reach, 5th grade, something that is because it's like a stair step, we're building on that. They may not have had that. So just making sure that we provide that extra clarification when introducing new or unfamiliar topics, but also not assuming. We can't assume that our students know that. Also allowing demonstration of mastery through drawing, listing, labeling, use of native language if needed, and peer collaboration. So in the beginning, it is acceptable for a student to use their native language. You may not be able to grade it, but it is acceptable for them to use it until they can transition over. When I taught middle school, I taught middle school ELA for ESL students, and when we would do a journal every day, and the newcomers that would come in the beginning, their journal would be entirely in another language. So I had one student who was Korean, I had another one that's Vietnamese. I couldn't read it, but they would respond and they would, write. And then eventually you would start seeing a few English words and more and more, and eventually it would transfer over and it would be in English. So it does happen, it just takes time. So it is acceptable to allow them. But also on the other hand, we have to make sure that students that have been here for a while, they're not using it as a crutch, and that does happen too. So you kind of have to, know your student and know what they're capable of. Providing slower speech, verbal cues, and simplified language. Just like I'm doing here now, I'm talking fast to get through information. As teachers, we've got a lot of information to share. And so we talk fast. Not only that, is some of us have accents, and that's okay. Accents are beautiful, but if you're an English learner, that does make it hard. And, I think about me growing in my Spanish language. When I talk to some people in Spanish as opposed to others, I have to tell them, oh, I need you to slow down. Like, I can't keep up. Or even maybe depending on what region or what country they're from, where they speak Spanish, it varies and it's harder for me to understand. So think about it like that for our English learners. Across the US, we have different accents, we say different things. And so our students have to be, get used to that. So using that slower speech, but using verbal cues and simplifying language. Now, we want to use academic language, but it may be that I use the academic word, and then now I'm going to give a simplified word. So I'm going to give this word, and then I'm going to use a word that's not as difficult so that they can get the understanding. Providing adapted text and outlines or notes. When possible, if you can get your hands on adapted text, that's great. We can't always, or we don't, we don't have the funds. But especially at the upper grades, giving students an outline. So if teachers could create an outline of what the conversation is going to be today, then a student can follow. In the beginning, if the teacher could even give full notes, just already have something where they could hand the student, where the student could kind of look at and follow. Now, I know that's more work. I always tell teachers though, if you can do it once, then you don't have to do it again. You can keep using that pretty much that same type of format, each lesson. Also providing linguistically accommodated classwork and homework. This does not mean that, the whole class is going to do 10 problems and you're only going to do 5. What it means to linguistically accommodate is looking at the language and whatever's being asked and putting simplified verbiage above it or below it. So for example, whenever I taught middle school, my students would often bring me assignments from science, social studies, math, and I would basically take a look at it and write simplified versions above it. Then I started asking the teachers, hey, when you're going to have a test, if you will send me the test ahead of time, I'll simplify the language. And so I would just take the test and I would simplify whatever was being asked and put it in parentheses. I wasn't marking it out, but just giving another version to what's being asked so the student could understand that. Also, we're going to take a look at the TELPAS rubric, but using the PLDs, the proficiency level descriptors from TELPAS, using that as a year-round tool to monitor your students' progress. So it's helpful if your teachers know right now, here are the PLDs, here's your list of ELs, here's where they were last year, or if in 2020, because of our COVID shutdown, they didn't take TELPAS, where were they in 2019, and helping them understand, look here, so-and-so is a beginner right now, and we want to move them up a level. So here's what you can expect, but here's where we want to go. And so really using that rubric as a tool year round, not just when it's time to rate, let's pull out those PLDs, but let's use them all around. Also, you'll notice at the bottom, all these things, well, not all, the items that I have an asterisk next to, you have to really consider the degree of support as dependent on the student's language proficiency. So it may be a student doesn't need that, or a student needs more of that. So just be mindful that some of the things that, when you go back and you may look at this later, the ones that are asterisk, just know that it just depends on the student's language proficiency. You may or may not need to use those strategies or those ideas. Okay, so now taking a look at the student, what would we see in here as we walk into the classroom and we're looking at the students? Well, we would hope to see them being engaged and participating. So even if I have a non-English speaker in there, they are to some degree participating with other students in whatever, wherever they're comfortable. So what does that look like? So in action, we would see that they're participating to the maximum extent that their proficiency allows. So it may be that they're just sitting and listening. Because in the beginning, we're trying to obtain our listening proficiency. So it could be that they're engaged with a small group or doing centers or doing something, and they may not be speaking, but they're listening, but they're not set off to the side. They are engaged. Also, we would see that those students have opportunities to listen, speak, read, and write. And so there's constantly opportunities. If you have attended my session talk, read, write, talk, for English learners, or if you've heard of the book Talk, Read, Talk, Write, those are that book is very helpful in just setting up a framework in the classroom to help teachers understand, let's talk about it, okay? Let's read about it, let's talk again, now let's write. And having that structure across all of your classrooms will be very helpful for all students because it gives you the opportunity naturally to listen, speak, read, and write. You might also hear students using their native language. Also non-linguistic representation to complete assignments. So you might hear students using their native language. So if there's another peer in the classroom, they may be asking another student, what's going on? What am I supposed to do? Also, you may see that the work that they're doing is non-linguistic. So it may be visuals. You have them using graphic organizers to complete assignments. And they may need native language peer or teacher support. So if that teacher happens to speak another language, or obviously if you're walking in a bilingual classroom, but I would make this suggestion when we're talking about a peer, be very mindful that that peer may not want to translate. So I've had situations where, they say, oh, well, I have a student in here that speaks, Chinese. I'll just have him translate. Well, I've had situations where that student did not want to translate. And I've had phone calls where parents have said, my kid's spending their whole time translating for another kid. So just, as you do share with teachers that, or leadership, that just be mindful that you need to make sure the student is okay with helping translate. And also we don't want it to take away from their learning because they're spending that whole time translating for another student. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back out to breakout rooms, but I want you to think about all those different elements that I shared. And again, not an exhaustive list, but what do you notice about the elements of a classroom with English learners? Okay, what do you notice about those things that I shared? And are there any that need more focus at your campus or in your district? Really just think about what you saw and where you would like to go, either at Charlie, you and Sandra at the district level. So where do you really feel like that focus needs to lead to? So I'm going to move you back into breakout rooms, and I'm going to give you a little bit more time. And so you have more time that you can share, because I know last time was not enough. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to pause our recording. Okay, so great conversations in what you've noticed about these different elements. Again, mentioning these are not an exhaustive list, but as you can kind of see, these are good things for all students. We have such a diverse we have such diverse classrooms now with special education. We have students that are dyslexic, and all these things are going to be helpful. But again, sounding like a broken record, it's absolutely necessary for the English learner to be successful. So we must have those things in place. But in the meantime, you're going to help many other students. So how do these elements relate to t-tests? I kind of just want to take us back, and I'm not going to go through all of the different pieces of the rubric, but I do want you to understand, and I'm sure you already, if you've been a t-test appraiser, you see where these things all fall into place. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm going to pick out two particular, just remembering that, when a teacher may come to you, or even a campus leader comes to you and says, okay, well, these are all fine and well, but how does this relate to t-test whenever I'm coming through and doing walkthroughs and appraising our teachers? So I picked just two that we're going to look at. And so communication. Again, it doesn't spell out exactly like what the elements that I've been sharing, but you can see even with communication where we talk about, even if we just look at our middle of the road, right? What we call rock star, just proficient, right? Rock solid, excuse me. The proficient level, they provide opportunities for students to communicate effectively with teachers and the peers. They recognize students' misunderstandings. Okay, and respond with an array of techniques. That's very important. And I know it might be tiny for you on the screen, but yes, we have to be already knowing, oh, my EL might not understand this. And so how am I going to respond and clarify? Also, making sure that we provide explanations that are clear and use verbal and written communication that's clear and correct. Because I have done walkthroughs before where I've seen things on the board that were not correct grammatically, and that was an ESL teacher. So just making sure things are actually correct. But I'm not going to go through each piece, but I just want you to see that these things do fall into our categories. And then looking at differentiation, of course, again, going down to our proficient section, just adapts our lessons to address individual needs of students. So when we're designing lessons up front, when I'm planning my lessons, I'm looking at the ELPs. And I'm thinking about, I have to do my content standards, which are the TEKS, but I have ELs in my room, so I also have to address the ELPs. So what are we going to do to incorporate listening, speaking, reading, and writing? How is that going to look? And when you take a look at the ELPs, you'll notice that they progress. So it begins with very basic, like let's say in reading, it might start with, the sounds of the alphabet. Well, that would be your newcomer, right? But then as you go down, you'll see that they progress, and it's almost like going from beginner to advanced high. And so really encouraging your teachers, it doesn't mean that I have 10 ELs in my room and I've got to plan 10 different lessons, but really just looking at what are the proficiency levels of my students? What's something that I can do when I plan to address the listening, speaking, reading, and writing? All right, so now let's look at some tools. So as we move forward and you think about what can we use to gauge an effective classroom for ELs? Now we have our T-test rubric, we have that we're using. Should we be appraising? But Sandra and Charlie, you may be in a role that you're not appraising, maybe you're supporting. And so what can you use to really support the campus level leadership or, your teachers and so forth? So again, going back to the ELPs and then looking at TELPAS. So ELPS is to TELPAS or TELPAS, however you want to say it, as the TEKS or TEKS is to STAR. So really helping teachers and even your leadership understand that, we use STAR to measure the content standards, okay? We use TELPAS to measure the language proficiency standards. So when it comes down to TELPAS time and our students are assessed, that goes into accountability. It goes into a lot. I mean, it determines whether or not a student is reclassified as English proficient. And so we have to be mindful, just like we are of STAR and what we're working towards, right? That we are doing the same for our TELPAS. So when you get this presentation, this QR code is going to take you to the ELPS, okay? And let's see. Actually, let me minimize real quick and I will put that in the chat box for you real quick. Oh, I guess I forgot to put that one in there. Okay, never mind. I thought I had the link in that one. I guess I forgot. All right, so here are our PLDs. And so we have the ELPs that you'll have access to. I'll put that in our follow-up email, but here are the PLDs. So that's proficiency level descriptors. This is just the speaking one that I have displayed. But what's important about using these as a year-round tool is, again, taking a look at where the student is at this moment, or maybe when they were last assessed, or just in general. I would say don't let spring of 2020 hang you up if your students didn't take TELPAS, and don't say, oh, well, I don't know what they were. Just kind of generally look at maybe 2019, or think about where just classroom observations where they are. So, but letting the teacher know, look, right now they're at intermediate. Okay, this is what they're doing. These are descriptors of what actions they're doing and speaking or reading and writing, all of the ones. And we want to get them to advanced. And so for them to look at the advanced column and go, oh, okay, I need them to be able to do these pieces. Now, something I like to say too with this is not a checklist. So when teachers rate, they shouldn't go, oh, well, they don't have that one, so they're not advanced. This is not a checklist to go down and check off and say, oh, well, they have more, they have all these over here. They don't, they're not that. So really looking at it as a holistic view. It's because some students are going to be one level in one area and they're going to be in a different level in another area. For example, in the beginning, because this is language acquisition, in speaking, they could be advanced high, listening advanced high. Speaking, they could be maybe there too, but reading and writing could be lower. Or it could be the opposite. I've seen many students at secondary that are in AP classes or pre-AP that are advanced high in reading and writing, yet they are still beginner intermediate in speaking. And I know you think, well, why would that be? Well, at secondary, we do less talking. At secondary, you're reading for the content, you're writing for the content, you're not practicing the language. And so often prior to us using TELPAS as a exiting or a reclassification measure, we would go back and give a language proficiency test. And I used to take my elementary teachers with me and we would go test at the end of the year. And they were always shocked because they would test students who are in AP, pre-AP, and yet they couldn't be reclassified because they were still a beginner intermediate in listening and speaking. And again, it's my belief that it goes back to it's secondary. We do less talking. The teacher does all the talking, and the students are not really allowed to talk as much. I think we're getting better, but that's still, we have a long road ahead of us. So going to the PLDs, really encouraging your staff to look at these and use them now. Don't wait until it's time to rate. Here's an idea, depending on your load of students, but here's an idea is, taking these either electronically or paper. And something I used to do is I would write, like let's say I'd write Melanie on here, and I would circle where that student was or whatever at each level, and I would give that to the teacher. Here's Melanie, here's where she is right now, but we need to move her a level. And so that way they could see where that student was at this point in time. And then again, where do they need to go? And that's just one way. It doesn't have to be done that way. All right, any comments or thoughts about the ELPs and really doing more to integrate those, or even looking at the PLDs? Any comments or questions or thoughts you have about this?
Yeah, I love the idea of, getting, especially with secondary teachers, and having them look at this. And, our high school has early release Fridays now for PLC and instructional planning and some tutorial times. Thank you. And so I really think this would be a good activity to do with those teachers for just instructional planning purposes, like how are we speaking, and, even getting that better picture of their students. Like, you get to know your kids, and so many of them, like, they don't want you to know what their actual levels are. So they nod and they respond and they are funny. And but whenever it comes down to the academic piece of it, there's a disconnect. And so I think it'd be really enlightening for them to see this.
And I think, our conversation throughout this morning has really been to students in general, right? I mean, all kids in general. I would probably say if I came to your campuses and I gave them the language proficiency test, I bet there a lot of them would qualify as an EL. And but they're a native English speaker, right?
Yep.
I think the pieces on this rubric, it's again going back, helping the teacher see this is, yes, I know it feels like another thing, and it is kind of another thing, but remember, these things will help all of your students. And then also when it comes time to rate, it's not so daunting. I've looked at this all year. And your elementary, where it's like K1, where it is all holistic on all parts, you'll likely to have a more accurate rating than what you would maybe normally. Also, remember, our writing is still holistically rated, and that writing, if it's not rated accurately, could keep a student from reclassifying. And which is, again, it's bad, not that it's bad that they stay as an English learner, but it could keep them from reclassifying, because especially our ELA teachers, they rate harder, because again, they're not looking at the language proficiency pieces. So I think if all along you're using this, you're going to see more successful not successful, but more accurate ratings and more successful students. All right, thanks for sharing, Charlie. Okay, here's another great tool, a favorite of mine. It's it does say 2014 at the end or at the bottom, but this is the ELPS 212 leader pathway, and these are suggested teacher behaviors. And you'll see it still says ELL, excuse me. So it is an older document, and there is a K1 as well. But what I like about it is you can see that the language domains, and you can see the proficiency levels. And this is what we should see from the teacher. So this could be shared with your, your administrators and even the teachers for them to use and go, oh, okay, well, she's got a classroom full of advanced high students. So this is what I should see happening, or we've got beginners. And so I could kind of use all these as strategies. So again, I think it would go for, you could give it to the teacher. You could give it to, your appraisers. or you can adapt this and make it your own. But I like sharing this because I think it's helpful to be able to see, because you can see there's even a column for feedback, and there's beginning, middle, and end of year. So that appraiser could also use that in that manner. Or let's say you have an ESL specialist, or someone who support, that is their role. They're not a self-contained classroom teacher. This would be helpful to go and observe them, and be able to use this, but marry it with t-tests and be able to give feedback. So I wanted to share this one with you, and I am gonna minimize my screen because I know I have that link in here. Come on. Okay. So I'm going to put this link in, but please remember, I'm going to send all of this to you after we meet.
Melanie,
Yes.
on that ELPS 2 through 12, that leader pathway that you just showed us, it's on this. Okay, so you're saying that you would use that to observe the teacher,
You
or
could.
or is that the you're observing the student?
No, it's for a teacher.
So walk me through that again then.
Yeah. Okay.
I
I mean, you could use it. I mean, here's the thing is these are teacher behaviors, but let me show you real quick. Let's go back. So these are, there's a K1 and I'm showing you the 212 also. So this is suggested teacher behaviors. So I could put the teacher's name in, what do they teach? And then I might even know what the makeup of their classroom is. So they've got maybe 1 beginner,
Okay.
5 intermediate or whatever. And so then when I go in, I'm kind of looking at, well, I know they've got a few beginners or a mixture of students. And so I'm watching, do these things happen? Are these things happening in the classroom? Okay, as I'm walking through and observing. And it may be that you don't know the makeup. So like you're coming from the central office. I may not know the makeup of their classroom, but just going in observing, I can kind of probably see and just take a look and see, are these things happening? And then I can give feedback over here. So I could observe them at the beginning, the middle, the end of the year, or just, like I said, I would just use it. I would also give it to the appraiser alongside the t-tests. And so I can kind of use that to see, are they doing these things because they have ELs in their classroom? Okay. Does that make more sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's just another tool. It's not something that has to happen. I just like to share it because it's already there for you. And these suggested teacher behaviors are, they're good things that the teachers need to know. All right. Okay, our time is going fast. All right, what we're going to do here is we're going to watch. So we're going to watch this video, but I just put the link in the chat box to the ELPS 212. Okay. And if you would like to follow that link, or let me go back real quick. Or if you want to use the QR code, I want you to have this somewhere where you can either look at it alongside the video or look at it on your phone. If you don't have means to do either, that's fine too. But we're going to watch this video, and I want you to watch the teacher and the student and really think about what would be some of the feedback that you would give the teacher based off of this quick observation. Okay, so I'm going to give you a moment if you want to follow the QR code or the link in the chat box. And you don't have to have this pulled up in order to observe and give feedback. I think you'll have plenty of feedback to give, even if you don't have this document in front of you. All right. So I'm going to play this video, and then we're going to have a discussion about what would the feedback be that we would give to this teacher.
We have testing all week this week and next week. The tests are going to be hard, but that's all right because we're going to try really hard. Isn't that right, Cameron? Yes, Ms. Keith. Okay, great. Everyone listen up. So we're going to work all week at ours from the answer and the information in the story, okay? We're going to go ahead and factual test and try this ACTIS test. Test your ups. We're going to page. You got to read? First on page 3.
¿Qué dijo? ¿A poco va a empezar el examen? No, es una práctica.
We're going to take notes from the story and we're going to turn it into a math problem and we're going to walk through it together, okay? So the boy ran 3 blocks. So everyone write 3 blocks. How long did it take him to run 3 blocks? Yep. Very good, 6 minutes. All right, so then we take 3 blocks and 6 minutes,
¿Por qué el
right?
niño corre con los bloques? ¿Qué? Sí, ¿por qué el niño corre con los bloques? No,
Okay, so the
corre 3
question is
calles.
gonna go on to ask us, how long will it take him to run 20 blocks? What do we do? How many minutes is that per block?
8 minutes.
Try and remember to raise your hand if you want to answer, okay? No, it's not 8 minutes. Michelle?
18 minutes?
Nope, not 18 minutes. Yes, Enrique?
40?
40, yeah, very good. How'd you get 40?
I don't know.
You don't know? Well, 40 is the right answer. How did you get it?
I forgot.
You forgot. Okay. Does anyone know how we get 40? Yes, Moises.
40?
Yep, that's right. Very good. Great. Can you tell us how you got that?
40?
Yep, very good. But can you explain to the class what you did here, how you got that?
40?
All right, you guys settle down.
That is so dumb.
Joe, do you want to lose your recess?
No.
Okay, then. Thank you, Moises.
Can you help me, please?
Can you take a walk with me? I don't want you to worry about the test, okay, Moises?
Sí, estoy preocupada sobre el examen. La directora Rosa dijo que todavía tenemos que hacer.
Try your best, okay? Do you understand? Not importante.
Sí, sí es importante.
You're right, Moises. It is important.
Okay. So I'm going to stop our share so we can kind of have a full view. Have you guys ever seen that video before? No? Okay. I like to use it because there's so much going on. You have Robin, there's a lot going on in, in that scene. But what would be the feedback that you guys would give that teacher had you been observing this and you're coming back in and you're going to meet with that teacher and coach them? What would be a few of the things that you would share with her? Where would you start?
It's like, where do you start? I think understanding the proficiency level is a huge thing. And like looking at a question, maybe you look at a question in Spanish and you say, how do you read this? I mean,
what could she have had when she kept saying, how do you do this? How did you figure this out? What could she have done instead?
Show me.
Show me.
Yeah.
Go up to the board, take him up to the board. And he had it on his paper. So, you could have real easily pointed and taken him to the board and had him show, even though he couldn't explain. Visually, you could watch and be able to figure that out. And the teacher could have explained.
Ultimately, that would never have happened in the classroom because I don't ever see that progress that way. Like, I don't believe that child would have actually gone to that desk and asked for help because of the way that he was shut down earlier. I don't think she'd ever would have gotten to that point.
Right.
That movie
Mhm.
Yes, in a really great world that would happen, but in reality, no, that kid
No.
would just shut down.
Exactly. Yeah. And also, I don't know, at the end, she says, yes, it is important. I don't know that that would have happened either.
No.
Just would have been dismissed most often. And, again, I don't think that teachers have any ill intentions. They just don't know. And that's why for me, over the years, I've been so passionate about this work is because I want to share that knowledge, because no one goes out and says, I'm not going to help a kid or,
No.
be in teaching. And if they are, they don't need to be teaching, but, just to be able to give them those tools. What are some other things you might give? What other feedback would you give to that teacher?
There is too much, there's almost too much in the classroom. Like the kids just grasping for everything. So like if your board has too much information, like we want all this vocabulary, but there's a point that if they don't know what to do with it, then it's just noise. And so like the blocks, like he was attributing, the blocks that he saw in the classroom to the story. And maybe she could have clarified that in some way.
Because again, we can't assume, because even blocks, my children, we live kind of in a rural, although they've been to the city, we live in a rural area. They may not know what blocks are. I mean, they may think blocks, I don't know what they're going to think. So again, it's just going back to, we cannot assume that a student knows something. And you guys know how it's been on STAR. There's things that are presented and kids have never experienced it. Riding a roller coaster. I can remember that being, one of the prompts, over the years, like, what if a kid's never gone on a roller coaster? So again, just if you have an English learner in your classroom, that you're constantly on your toes of, oh, they may not know that. So let's clarify. And then that's going to clarify for the SPED student, for any other student that may be at risk and needs that support, or just, another student that may not know that term. All right, any other reflections about that video?
It was too much.
Well, she puts that picture down. It's like, no, like be excited about the picture.
I know. Well, and in the beginning too, her back is she's talking, that's the thing I see a lot too. The teachers are talking, they're not facing the students, and they're giving directions. Because too, when you're an English learner, you do a lot of reading of the lips. I'm watching to see what they're saying, which now, of course, during our current situation, that's a whole nother, thing. But yeah, there's a lot going on. And, not to be negative Nelly, but the sad part is there's a lot worse than even that, the sad thing is. Okay. All right. Very good. Let's go back.
What is the name of that video?
It's I think it's Moise. Okay, well, they're here. You can see this, but it's Moise in math class. I think is if you search that. There's also another. I don't have it in this session, but I've used it in another one. If you go to the Iris Center, like the flower Iris, there's a section on English learners, and there's a video on Bix and Calc. And I use it in one of my sessions because when you watch the first clip, and I asked the participants, like, do you think this student has her CALP, has her cognitive, academic language proficiency? Does she have that? And a lot of them will say, yes, yeah, she does. But what they're watching is a more of a social interaction. And then when you watch the next clip, it's very academic, and all of a sudden you see how the student struggles. And so the student really only had her Bix, her social language, not the academic. And I use it to show that, again, you heard me earlier say, often teachers will say, well, I don't know why they're in ESL. They speak just fine. But when it comes down to actually measuring achievement or them being assessed, then sometimes they're not successful. So that's another great place to go, is the Iris Center. It may be called the Iris Peabody Center. I can't remember now. But anyway, if you go there, you will find lots of good resources to use with your teachers for staff development. And if you're ever in one of my sessions, I can't remember which one I use it in, but we actually go through that. All right, so now in thinking back, what are some of your current concerns in regards to the English learners in your district? Did you hear some ideas that you would like to try in your district or charter school? So as you kind of reflect back, so think about, if you can share, what are your current concerns? And then did you hear some things that you would like to try as you move forward and lead in your district? So whoever wants to go first is welcome to.
This has been a great session. I think that the main thing I'm probably going to do with it is I probably will take the exact same content and take it to our campus administrators and kind of walk them through okay, what are we seeing in the classroom? Are we being intentional with what we are giving in terms of feedback to our teachers on how they're reaching those ELs? I love the idea of taking that PLD, putting that child's name on it, marking, even though we don't have April 2020 or spring 2020, but putting it where they were last, so those teachers can then separate, okay, yeah, they can have a conversation with their peers, but when it comes to academic, which is what we have to look at, this is where they're really at. I just think them having a working knowledge of where that child is so they can progress to that next level, I think is important. But I've loved everything I've learned today.
Good.
It's been very, very helpful.
Good.
And I ask, are you sharing this actual PowerPoint with us?
Yes, in a PDF version, version, I will send it to you guys. And something else to look at, Sandra, well, all of you, and I will send it in the follow-up email, is the TELPAS listening the listening and speaking rubrics that are on TELPAS resources. It shows you what gets you the score of a 1, 2, 3, 4. Like it lines out what they're looking for. And I think that's important too for your leadership and for your teachers to know that this is where we're trying to get them. They need to be here. And so they know what to expect, because I know a lot of the talk has been, and I get it, and I do agree with it, but that, well, the microphone wasn't working or the technology, and I get it. This is not natural. I would hope that the silver lining from us shutting down is that kids will be more comfortable talking online, because most of us, we were all shut down, and you may or may not have been still conducting school in a virtual manner, but that they're more comfortable with it. But just that practicing piece, also something I like to recommend on the speaking part is making sure that when students are doing that you give them a piece of paper to write out what they're going to respond. And that's a practice that I use in my sessions all along, because you have to think about it. We ask a student a question, or we ask we're doing PD, and we ask a question. Well, I need time to process. And if I write it down, I can process my thinking. If I'm a language learner, I can, I've got time to maybe even I got to translate something. But then when it's time to share out, if I'm shy or I'm not sure if mine's right, I have my little sticky note or my piece of paper, and I can go to Charlie and I can read it and not feel uncomfortable. And then I can go out to the larger group and feel okay about reading my sticky notes. So if I'm shy, I can stick to my little note. Or if I'm an English learner, I can sit there and look at my note. I've shared this with some of the different participants that I have my own sentence stems and paragraph frames in Spanish that I used to use when I was in district. I have a little red book that literally, like, I'd have to make phone calls about pre-K in Spanish, and I had my little book of sentence stems and paragraph frames to get me through. But again, doing that technique where you have them write it, then they say it, and then making sure they understand that they can re-record if they need to, I think would be helpful too. All right, Charlie, what about you? What are some
I think
or ideas?
really using those PLDs and then listening, speaking rubrics with teachers and just doing some like very intentional lesson planning and talking about their kids, just for instructional planning and purposes, not just because it will impact their special ed students, their 504 kiddos. I like this leader pathway document a lot. I think that that in conjunction with how Sandra said, really kind of going back to the campus leadership teams, and going back through what are the look fors on a campus level and utilizing this document also, and maybe starting to work towards some expectation of looking for that in the classrooms would be good. But really, like, I don't know, you said that about the campus admin training, and then that just got my mind rolling on like, well, if we have some teacher planning, if we have this or that, then maybe I could pull campus admin and we could talk back through like, hey, we had 37 middle school students that did not exit last year because of speaking alone. What's happening in our classrooms?
Right.
And so just kind of that, you know, you never teach to a test, but that also means that our instructional practices maybe aren't where we think they are either. And so
And we have to think about it. And I'm not, when I say this, I don't mean that STAR is not important,
right.
but the ELPS, I mean, that's like your language, right? I mean, I mean, that you have to have that. I mean, if I miss an algebra 1 TEK, I'm probably going to be okay, right? But whenever you're talking about your basic language proficiency, that's extremely important, because that sets up the future for a student, whether or not maybe what their future may hold for them. So not to say that, the TEKs are not important, but I mean, ELPS, that's the foundation. So, yeah, great. Well, and just remembering too, guys, whatever you share with your leadership, we don't want teachers to be blindsided and not know that they're looking for those things. So whatever you would share, just making sure that you, talk to the teachers about the why, and always going back to why we want to do it. It's not just for TELPAS. And it's not just about accountability. There are lots of other whys and why it's extremely important. And so always knowing, I mean, I'm that person. I need to know why, and so I can buy into it more. Robin, are there any reflections that you would like to share? I know you said you're not currently, in the classroom, but is there anything that you would like to add to the conversation?
Some of just the same things that they said. I like the idea of kind of just keeping track of where the students are all year instead of just, monitoring them at certain times. And then, it's just great to have reminders. Some of these things you already know, but they go to the back of your head, and then you hear it again. You think, oh yeah, that's right. I've got to make sure that I'm, consciously doing this or repeating this. And so that was great.
Yes, definitely. And so when I have face-to-face trainings, a lot of times I give the disclaimer of many of you will already know a lot of these things. Because if you've been around as long as I have, it's, education, we keep circling back around, right? We have these new initiatives and you're like, oh, we'll already do that. They're just calling it something different. But I always like to, share that it's affirmation for you to go, oh, wow. So what I was thinking or I am doing is where I should be going. And then it's also an opportunity for you to share with others. So, you want to share the knowledge. If you are going to a session and you already know all of it, that's great. That's affirming. But how can you coach others and help them understand the information too? All right. So real quickly, we're like right down to the wire. I do want to go through these 8 English learner myths that I have I've had experienced myself, and I really just want to go through these real quickly with you. So myth number 1 is that push-in model or inclusion will guarantee an increase in collaboration opportunities for EL success. That is not always the case. Now, often you are having to do push-in inclusion because of certification, but that does not necessarily mean that that's going to increase that EL's opportunity. Often in my scenarios or my experiences, it was that when I pushed in, I was utilized like an assistant and not sitting down and really working with a student. Or when I did, it was so loud, it was hard to even really have a little lesson. And so it was better for me to take the student and let's work on specific goals. So this is just a myth to know that I'm not saying that push-in and inclusion is bad, but it doesn't guarantee an increase in collaboration or opportunities. There's a lot more to it than just that. Also, sheltered instruction is forever. it's not necessarily forever. And what I mean by this is that, yes, all those sheltered instruction approaches are great for all kids, but I like to use this analogy of crutches. So you break your foot, you have a cast and crutches. Eventually, you don't need the crutches anymore, and you have a walking boot. And eventually, you get rid of the walking boot, maybe, but you're still doing rehab all along. And then eventually, you're back to running and walking or doing whatever. So with an EL, they're not, it's not forever. Now, there are some forever ELs that do go through our educational system where they're an EL from pre-K through 12. But I would put money on it that there are other issues, that it's not just about being an English learner. It's maybe they're were never diagnosed with a disability, or they have dyslexia. There might be something else going on. But your most average EL, will eventually move out. Also, EL funding, your Title III funding is limited to federal and state LEP dollars. So here's a question that I get now, and even it happened to me when I was in district. Often they would say, oh, well, this student is an EL and they're getting LEP funding, so we're not going to use any Title I funding. It's not limited to Title III. So if I have an EL kid, they may be at a campus that's Title I, they may be benefiting from other federal funding. So just know it's not limited to that Title III. Myth number 4, translating materials is adequate for communicating to EL families. It's not the only way that we should be supporting our English learners. We should be looking at other avenues to support our EL families. A part of Title III is that if you're receiving Title III funding, that you are required to do parent-family community engagement, some type of activity that goes above and beyond what you do for other families. And translating materials is not, that's just a basic need, and that does not fall into that category. But I wanted to share Talking Points. Talking Points is a free app that you can use. That means the teacher can type in a message, and that it can go to the, and it's all, the numbers are not shown. Honestly, I have not gotten down into the weeds of it, of how, I think you import all the numbers in. My husband did it when we were shut down, but so from his Skyward or wherever, he was able to bring in the students' parents' contact information, and he could text in English, and it would go to whatever language was set up for that family, and they would receive it. The family would text my husband back, and it would translate back into English for him. And so great free tool if you're not familiar with that. Myth 5, ESL teaching is just good teaching, and it is good teaching, but as you've heard me say over and over and over, it's absolutely necessary for our ELs, and we have to be very strategic and our planning and advocating for those students. So it is good teaching, but it's absolutely necessary. Myth 6, EL language development is the responsibility of the EL teacher or the ELA teacher. So often, we kind of peg, well, it's language, so the ELA teacher is responsible for that, or the ESL teacher, they're responsible for that. But remember, regardless of the content we teach, we are language teachers. Language of math, science, social studies. When we speak in front of our classroom, write on our board, we are modeling for students. And so we are all responsible, and we will never see academic achievement across the board for any student if we continue to function in the manner of reading, writing, speaking should only happen in an ELA class. Once we start spreading that throughout the other contents, we will begin to see, or at least in my opinion, more achievement. Myth 7, ELs no longer need language support once they exit a language program. That's not necessarily true. When students do exit the program, they are monitored for 2 years by the LPAC. And even students beyond that sometimes still need supports. And in those 2 years, the LPAC may need to bring the student back into the program if they're not being successful based on language. So just remember that just because they have exited doesn't mean that they don't no longer need any support. Going back to the analogy of breaking your foot, You know, I may still have some aches and pains and need to wear a brace on my foot later down the road. So it doesn't mean I no longer need, you know, some type of rehab or support. So just think about your English learners. They may still need some support. In myth 8, an EL automatically means it's a struggling student, and therefore they cannot be successful in GT or AP due to limited English skills. And that's a myth. So I've had many English learners that come in and they may not have the language, but based on, you know, I've done other testing like Naglieri is a so it's nonverbal assessment to see if they qualify for GT. So remember that language is not, it's not a handicap. You know, they're still learning. So we don't want to say they're a struggling learner and not allow them to participate in other programs. All right. So my challenge for you, and I give this challenge to you as when I came to the Service Center, I spent 2 years coaching teachers. So all the way from, you know, elementary to high school. And I would sit in the back of the classroom and think, if I were an English learner, would I be able to follow along and get the gist? And I was not there to coach in particular about English learners. I was there as an instructional content coach. So it was not that I was particularly in a classroom where I knew there were ELs or that the teacher was an ESL teacher. I was there strictly just to observe their instructional, you know, approach. So, but I always sat there and thought, you know, if I was an English learner, would I be able to follow along or get the gist? And that goes back to our modeling, you know, the I do, we do, you do. It goes back to visuals, clear, explicit directions, all those things we talked about this morning. You know, I would think about, would I be able to really follow along or get the gist of what's happening? So I challenge you as you go out and support your campuses or your classrooms, that you really encourage your staff to think about, even when I'm planning my lessons, you know, and thinking, are they going to understand what I mean? And really looking at it and refining, making sure that everything is very clear and explicit. All right. So before we end our time together today, I would like for you to take a real quick poll for me. It's just 3 questions. And it's really just to gauge, it's for me. So I know, do I need to do something different next time? So these are general questions, but if you can answer these 3 questions to give me an idea of how today went, that way I will, you know, go back and look and refine for next time. But you should see that poll pop up if you can answer those 3 questions for me. All right, I'm just gonna wait. I have one more person that needs to. It's okay, Charlie. I'm waiting on one more person.
My executive director walked in and needed to talk to me about something.
It's not a
So I
problem.
got distracted for a second.
You can't say no to that. Okay. All right. Thanks, guys. All right, so here's some resources that I'm going to share while we're ending our time together. And I know I'm already 2 minutes over, but this is when you get the PowerPoint, it is hyperlinked, but I will put the link into. This is just a Google site that I had built a while back. I presented this at a conference several years ago, or some bit of this. And so I created this kind of EL PLC for administrators that has some resources on there. So you will have this when you get the PowerPoint. As well as I'll put the link in the follow-up email as well, but just some resources there. And, you know, it's a living document. So as I come across things, I will add to it. Also, oh, it's taking us there. Hold on. I clicked on it and that's not really where I want to go. Okay, go back. All right, sorry about that. And then this is a Google site that I continue to share. It is something that, oh, well, hold on. I'm so glad I'm recording. This is going to be a great recording. So this is my English Learner Resources site, and I continually share this. You are welcome to share this with your staff. You can put it on your website. It's meant to share. And again, you'll have access to this, but it has lots of resources for teachers, even students. You can put a student, go to a section and let the student practice as well. And really it came about because when I first started here, and I was not in this area, but Gretchen Kroos, which I took her position, she had known me throughout the years of being at the district level. And she's like, oh my gosh, we have a district that is needing help. And so that's where this was born. And so please feel free to share this, and you're welcome to put on your website as well. Also, we have lots of sessions coming up between leadership and bilingual ESL teachers. I don't know where we're at this month, at this point, but this month alone, I think we had like 14 sessions. So it's something I'm very proud about, because I really felt strongly moving over here to the service center and being able to provide more sessions for you guys. So this is our s'more. You can go check out other sessions that we have going on. And then finally, this is my contact information. Also, if you are not a part of my EL Leader Toolkit s'more, that is a more compliance newsletter that I put out every month. And then I also have Succeeding in a Diverse Classroom for English Learners. And so that's another newsletter that I put out every month for instruction. If you would like to join either one of those, if you will email me and just say, I want to join, the compliance or the instruction or both, then I will add you to my email, the group where you will get it in your inbox, or you can just follow me on social media and I put them there every month. So last week, both of those I posted on both Facebook and Twitter. So we do, if you're on Facebook, we do have a ESC Region 11 English Learner Support Facebook page, and then Twitter, and then we now have a YouTube channel. And on YouTube, we post our recordings. And so you can go back there and watch those or share with your staff, and any other sessions that I attended during the spring or summer that when I attended PD outside of the service center, a lot of those had recordings that I was able to share. So I've put lots on there, and it'll continue to grow. So feel free to, share those things out. And then this page, when you get it, is hyperlinked, so you can actually go to TEA or Regional Level Support. And then the at-home support, that is from the shutdown. However, I would encourage you to go look there, because there's still some good things that can be used now in class, or whether or not you still have remote learners. So lots of good stuff. But I'm going to stop the recording, and that way, if you guys have any other questions. But thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you being here. And I know it was not quite ideal with only having a few. So, but I hope that you still feel good about the collaboration and the ideas.